The morning I found the pill organizer on my kitchen counter, I thought my daughter-in-law had simply forgotten it. I was wrong. I didn't know it yet, standing there in my bathrobe, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at that little weekly pill case with my name written on a strip of tape across the top. 7 compartments. 7 days. Each one already filled. My heart was doing something strange. A slow, heavy thudding that I had been ignoring for 3 months. I told myself it was age. I was 63 years old, retired, and apparently that was all the explanation anyone needed. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio. I coached the debate team for 19 of those years. I bought my house on Clement Street in 1987, the year my son was born. I mowed that lawn every Saturday from April through October. I shoveled that driveway every winter without asking for help. I was not a man who needed taking care of. But grief does something to you. When my wife, Carol, passed away 2.5 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end, something shifted in me that I could not name. Not depression exactly, more like a loose thread. Like something that had held me together for 34 years had simply been pulled, and I was slowly coming undone at the edges. My son, Daniel, noticed. He called more often. He drove up from Cincinnati on weekends. He brought his wife, Michelle, who was a pharmacist, licensed, educated, practiced at a hospital downtown. She had sharp eyes and a gentle voice, and she always called me Dad, even though I had never asked her to. "You look tired," she told me one Sunday in October. "Are you sleeping?" "Fine," I said. "I sleep fine. Your color is off." She tilted her head the way she did like a doctor, like someone cataloging symptoms. "Are you eating enough protein?" I told her I was eating fine. She smiled and said nothing more about it. 3 weeks later, the pill organizer appeared. Michelle had left it on my counter after a Sunday visit. A note tucked underneath in her neat handwriting. "Dad, just some supplements. Vitamin D, magnesium, CoQ, 10. Good for your heart. Take 1 from each compartment every morning with food. Love, M." I stood there reading that note for a long time. My heart. She had written "good for your heart." The strange thudding had started in September. I had not told anyone about it. How did she know? I told myself I must have mentioned it. I forgot things sometimes, not badly, not the kind of forgetting that worries you, but the ordinary fog of a man living alone in a quiet house. I must have said something during dinner. Must have mentioned being tired, short of breath on the stairs. I took the pills that Monday morning. I took them Tuesday. Wednesday. By Thursday, I felt something that I can only describe as a softening, like the edges of the room had gone slightly out of focus. Like I was watching my own life from 3 feet behind my own eyes. I thought I was relaxing. I thought, finally, grief was loosening its grip. I kept taking the pills. By December, Daniel and Michelle had started a new conversation. It happened gradually, the way all important things happen. Not in one moment, but in dozens of small moments that you only recognize later as a pattern. It started with the house. "This place is a lot to maintain," Daniel said one evening. He was standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. "Especially in winter. The gutters alone, I manage fine," I said. "Dad." His voice was patient. "Careful. We worry about you. It's a lot of space for one person." Michelle was nodding from across the room. She had a glass of wine and she was nodding. And something about the synchronized quality of it, his words, her nod, both perfectly timed, made a small, cold place open up in my chest. I noticed it, then I forgot about it. That is the part I cannot fully explain. I noticed things. I had small moments of clarity, a flash of something is wrong here, and then the clarity would dissolve, like a word you knew perfectly well until someone asked you to define it. Later, I would understand why. By January, Daniel had started suggesting I look into a smaller place. A condo, maybe. Something easier. He knew a real estate agent. He had already, apparently, spoken to her. "You already called someone?" I said. Just to get information, he said. For you. Just to have options. Michelle put her hand on my arm. No pressure, she said. We just want you to be comfortable. Her hand was warm. Her eyes were kind. I looked at her, and I could not find a single thing to distrust. I took my pills the next morning. It was the second week of February when I ran into my old colleague Frank at the hardware store. Frank Gallagher had taught chemistry at the same school for 22 years. We had eaten lunch together for most of that time. After Carol died, he had been the one to drive me home from the hospital at 2 in the morning, and he had sat with me in my kitchen until the sun came up without saying anything at all, which was exactly what I needed. He saw me in the paint aisle and stopped walking. Jim, he said. And then, after a pause, You okay? Fine, I said. Getting some weather stripping. You look. He stopped himself. What? He chose his words carefully. Frank always chose his words carefully. You look like you looked in the months after Carol, he said. That kind of far away. I told him I was fine. But that night, I sat in my living room and thought about what he said. Far away. Was I far away? I tested myself the way you do. Remembered the capitals of all 50 states, recited the years of every major American conflict, ran through the names of every student I could recall from my first decade of teaching. I remembered everything. My memory was intact, but my wanting was gone. The small daily desires that make up a life, wanting to call someone, wanting to read a particular book, wanting to take a drive, just to take a drive, all of it had gone quiet. Like a radio turned down so low you stop noticing it's playing. I told myself it was winter. I told myself it was grief. I took my pills. The morning everything changed started like an ordinary morning. I had a dentist appointment at 9, and afterward I stopped at Schiller Park because the February thaw had turned everything unexpectedly soft. And I had always loved that park. Carol and I used to walk there on Sunday afternoons, and some days I still went just to sit on the bench near the old oak tree, where she once found a $20 bill on the ground and laughed so hard she had to hold onto my arm. I sat on that bench. The sun was thin and pale, but it was there. A dog ran past chasing a tennis ball. 2 women pushed strollers side by side, talking. An older man was feeding pigeons near the fountain. And then the bench seemed to tilt. It didn't tilt. I know that now. But that is how it felt. A long, slow tilting, and a sound like the world being turned down. And then nothing. When I came back, a woman was kneeling beside me on the ground. She had her hand on my wrist, not holding it, but pressing, 2 fingers against the inside of my wrist. She was counting. Sir, she said. Sir, can you hear me? I was on the ground. I had slid off the bench, and I was on the ground, and I did not know how long I had been there. What? My voice came out wrong. Thin. Don't try to sit up yet, she said. I called 911. They're coming. She was in her 50s, I guessed. Gray hair cut short, wearing a fleece jacket with a hospital logo on the chest. A nurse, maybe. Or a technician. She had reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she was looking at me with the kind of focused attention that comes from training. Not alarm. You collapsed, she said. You were on the bench, and then you weren't. I'm fine, I said. Which was what I always said. You're not fine, she said. Your pulse is irregular. How long has that been happening? I don't. I have a thing with my heart sometimes. Thudding. Since when? September, maybe. October. Something moved across her face. Not alarm. More like recognition. Are you on any medication? She asked. Just supplements, I said. My daughter-in-law. I stopped. She was looking at me very steadily. Supplements, she said. Vitamin D. Magnesium. CoQ10. For my heart. She didn't. The sirens were getting closer. Do you have them with you? She asked. No. They're at home. What's your daughter-in-law's profession? Pharmacist. Again, that thing across her face. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, when the paramedics get here, I need you to tell them everything. The supplements, when they started, all of it. Can you do that? Why? She looked at me for a long moment. The dog came back past us, chasing the tennis ball again, and the world felt very ordinary and very strange at the same time. Because I'm a toxicologist, she said. And what you're describing doesn't sound like vitamin deficiency. Her name was Dr. Patricia Webb. She worked at Ohio State's Wexner Medical Center, and she had been walking through that park on her lunch break for 15 years, and I will spend the rest of my life grateful that she chose that particular bench. On that particular Thursday, the paramedics came. They took my vitals. My heart rhythm was what they called concerning not a word you want to hear while lying on the ground in a park in February, but also not a word that sent them running, which I chose to take as a good sign. Dr. Webb spoke to them quietly off to the side. I watched her. I watched the way they listened to her. The way one of them pulled out a notepad. At the hospital, they asked me about the supplements 4 times. Different people, different ways, but always the supplements. A doctor I hadn't met came in and sat down and said, Mr. and I gave him my name and he said, we'd like you to bring in whatever you're taking at home. Everything. Can someone get that for you? I called Frank. The yellow pill organizer on the kitchen counter, I said. And whatever else is in the cabinet above the sink. Don't touch anything else. Just bring it in a bag. Frank, to his credit, did not ask a single question on the phone. It took 4 days. 4 days of tests, of Frank bringing me clean clothes and bad cafeteria coffee, of Daniel calling twice a day, with a concern in his voice that I was only now learning to hear differently. He asked, every call, whether the doctors had figured out what had caused the episode. He asked if I needed Michelle to come up, she would know what questions to ask. She understood medications. It might help to have her there. I'm fine, I told him. I have good doctors. Dr. Webb checked in each day. She was not technically my physician. She had been a bystander who happened to be a toxicologist, but the hospital had consulted her, and she came. On the 4th day, she sat across from me and told me what they had found. The CoQ10 capsules were real. The vitamin D was real. The magnesium was real. But there was a 4th substance in the organizer that I had never been told about. A compound, she explained carefully. Not a dramatic poison. Nothing that would have killed me quickly. Nothing that would have shown up without looking for it. A compound that, taken daily over several months, would cause cognitive dulling, cardiac arrhythmia, and a gradual erosion of what she called executive function, decision-making, judgment, the ability to evaluate risk. In a man your age, she said, the symptoms would look very much like early-stage dementia. The room was very quiet. Someone, she said, would need to step in and help manage your affairs. I looked at the wall. Outside the window, Columbus was gray and flat and ordinary. How long? I asked. To establish legal guardianship under Ohio law? If cognitive decline could be documented over 6 to 12 months. She stopped. I'm not a lawyer, but that's the general framework. I thought about the real estate agent Daniel had already called. I thought about Michelle's hand warm on my arm. No pressure. We just want you to be comfortable. I thought about the house on Clement Street that I had owned since 1987, that Carol had planted the garden in, that was worth, in the current market, considerably more than it had been. I thought about Michelle, with her sharp eyes and her gentle voice and her license to dispense pharmaceuticals. I thought about how she had known about my heart before I told her. I put my face in my hands, not because I was going to cry, but because I needed a moment where no one could see my expression. Then I straightened up. What do I need to do? I asked. I want to be clear about something. I am 63 years old. I taught high school history for 31 years. I coach debate. I understand how evidence works, how arguments are built, how people are persuaded, and how they are manipulated. I spent 3 decades teaching teenagers the difference, and I had still not seen it. I want to be clear about that because I know someone listening to this is thinking, how could he not know, and I want you to understand. Whatever was in those capsules had been working on me since October, but even before that, grief had already softened something, and love, the specific love of a parent for a child, had done the rest. We do not want to believe that someone we raised could mean us harm. That belief does not make us foolish. It makes us human. But it also makes us vulnerable in ways that people who do not love their children will never understand. I am not ashamed that I loved my son. I am furious that he used it. Frank drove me home on a Sunday afternoon with a bag of legitimate medications from the hospital pharmacy and a referral to a cardiologist and the phone number for a lawyer that Dr. Webb had written on the back of a business card without saying anything, just setting it on my tray table and letting me figure out the rest. I sat in my living room, the same living room where Carol and I had watched every Super Bowl since 1989, where my son had taken his first steps on the beige carpet that I really should have replaced 15 years ago, and I looked at everything I had nearly lost. The house, the clarity, myself. Then I picked up the phone and called the lawyer. I will not walk you through all of it. Some of it is still too close. Some of it is still in process in ways that do not belong in a story told out loud, not yet. What I will tell you is this. The lawyer's name was Beverly Cho, and she did not blink once when I explained the situation. She asked for a copy of the toxicology report. She asked for the dates the supplements had been introduced. She asked whether I had any documentation of Daniel's conversations about the house, the real estate agent, the plans for my care. I had texts. I had voicemails. I am a retired teacher, and I am organized in the way that people are organized when they have spent 30 years keeping track of papers. Beverly Cho looked at what I gave her and said, "This is enough to begin." The police investigation took 11 weeks. I did not contact Daniel during that time, which was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the first year after Carol, harder than anything. I answered his calls. I said I was feeling better. I said the doctors had adjusted some things. I kept my voice even in the way I used to keep my voice, even when a student was lying to me, and I needed them to keep talking. Michelle was arrested on a Thursday morning. Daniel was arrested that same afternoon. I found out from Beverly, who called me while I was in the backyard looking at Carol's garden, which had survived the winter the way it always did. Stubbornly, improbably, green already coming up at the edges. There are things I want to say to my son that I will never be able to say in a courtroom. I want to ask him when it started. I want to know if there was a single moment when he made a decision, or if it crept up on him the way it crept up on me slowly, gradually, each small step feeling almost reasonable, until he was somewhere he never could have planned to be. I want to know if he ever loved me, or if I was always just the man in the house on Clement Street. I will probably never know, and I have had to make my peace with not knowing, which is its own kind of grief. Different from the grief of losing Carol, but carrying the same weight. The weight of a future you had imagined that no longer exists. My cardiologist's name is Dr. Anand. He is 38 years old and has a framed photo of his own father on his desk. And the first time I sat across from him, I thought, that man's son will never do what my son did to me. And I had to work very hard to believe that thought without bitterness. My heart is repairing. That is what Dr. Anand says. Repairing. Not repaired, not yet, but moving in that direction. Now that the compound is out of my system, the arrhythmia has decreased significantly. My cognitive fog lifted in the first 3 weeks, faster than expected, which Dr. Anand said was consistent with the duration of exposure and my overall health. "You're in good shape," he told me at my last appointment, "for any age." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed at something in a long time, and it surprised me. Frank still comes over on Saturday mornings. We drink coffee and argue about baseball and occasionally about history, because two retired teachers with too much time cannot help it. He does not talk about what happened unless I bring it up. He is, as I said, a man who understands what people need without being told. Dr. Webb. Patricia. I see occasionally. She walks through Schiller Park on her lunch break. Still, and once or twice I have been on that bench near the oak tree and she has stopped and we have talked for a few minutes about ordinary things. The kind of conversation that has no agenda and no danger in it. I did not know how much I had missed that until I had it back. I still live in the house on Clement Street. I am still replacing the weather stripping as it turns out. The gutters are fine. The garden came up this spring better than it has in years. I don't know why. The same soil, the same seeds Carol always ordered. But this year it came up lush and full and almost aggressive, like it had been waiting. I sat on the back steps and looked at it for a long time one evening in April. I thought about the man I had been in December, distant, foggy, agreeable in that alarming way that wasn't agreement but surrender. I thought about how close I had come to signing papers, to moving out, to becoming the thing they needed me to be. 63 years old. A retired teacher with a bad heart, and a house worth money, and a son who had decided to stop waiting, and a toxicologist on her lunch break who sat down on the ground next to a stranger and pressed 2 fingers against his wrist and started counting. That is how close it was. I stood up in court, and I spoke. I said what had happened in plain language, because I am a teacher, and I know that plain language is a form of power that complicated language cannot match. I did not perform grief. I did not perform anger. I simply told what I knew to be true in the order it had happened, and I let the facts do what facts do. The jury was out for less than a day. I did not feel what I expected to feel when the verdict came. I had expected relief or satisfaction or something that resolved. What I felt was quieter than that. Something that sat in my chest next to the place where the grief lives. Not replacing it. Not canceling it out, but alongside it. Evidence, I suppose, that 2 things can be true at once. That you can lose a son and survive the losing. That you can be a father who loved completely, and a man who was wronged completely. And neither of those things undoes the other. I drove home from the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The leaves were turning. Columbus was doing what Columbus does in autumn. All those ordinary maples going gold and red, the kind of beauty that is so familiar, you almost stop seeing it, until one day you almost lost everything, and then you see it so clearly, it almost hurts. I pulled into the driveway on Clement Street. I got out of the car, and I stood there for a moment with the keys in my hand. Then I went inside and put on a pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, which is where Carol and I used to sit every morning for 34 years, and I was still there. Still in my house. Still myself. That is the thing they could not take. That is the thing I want you to hold on to. Wherever you are tonight, whatever you're carrying, whoever has tried to make you smaller or quieter or easier to manage, the person you are is not a transaction. It is not a property to be transferred. It cannot be dissolved in a capsule and stirred into a weekly pill organizer. I know that now in a way I did not know it before. And I am, God help me, grateful for the knowing.